All right. So first of all, thank you guys for spending a portion of your Sunday afternoon today on EduFire with me. Hopefully, some of the stuff that I have to pass along today will be really useful to you guys, whether you're an entrepreneur right now or whether you're going to be an entrepreneur in the future. I've tried to take about a decade's worth of my time being an entrepreneur. It's been a little over 10 years now, and try to distill it down into some of the lessons that I've learned. And I'll talk a little bit about my experience, some of the companies that I've started, some of the successes that I've had, and also some of the things that haven't been so successful, and some of the lessons that I've learned from them, as well as some additional lessons that I pass on. And I've given a talk similar to this at colleges and universities before, so it's something that I've done a few times, but every time I do it, people have different questions, and I end up learning quite a bit. So. Start off with a little cartoon here. This is oftentimes people's approach to entrepreneurship, which if you can't read the cartoon, it basically says it's a bunch of people sitting around a table, and they say, here's our timetable: launch, grow rapidly, be bought by Google. And I think sometimes the outside world has the impression that that's what entrepreneurship is: launch, grow rapidly, be bought by Google. And it's something that I think that we'll definitely talk about today. Some of the myths of entrepreneurship, some of the things that people often find are challenging about entrepreneurship, and certainly some of the big opportunities and fun parts about entrepreneurship as well. So what we'll do is we'll talk through some of my experiences. I'll talk about my experience starting a company called 2000tutor.com, which was my first experience as an entrepreneur. Something called Pro, which no one's ever heard of because it never got off the ground. A company called Zods, which is something that we'll talk a lot about that, and another one called Learn Out Loud, and then finally a site you guys all know and many of you love called EduFire. Let's talk about what I've learned, some of the tips I can pass along, and as I mentioned, a Q&A at the end. So my first venture as an entrepreneur was 2000tutor.com, and it was a site that I started back in 1999 with a group of other people as basically a place for people to become more knowledgeable and possibly certified in Microsoft and Cisco technologies. So 2000tutor.com was one of those businesses where it was the .com days, and it seemed like everyone was starting a website. And we actually didn't start out with it as a website. We originally were planning to do a series of training facilities around the country, and in order to promote those training facilities, we launched a website, and we found that the website took off much faster than the actual training facilities themselves. So we ended up focusing all of our time and attention on the websites. Troy says, yeah, mcsetutor.com was one of the sites that we had. We had 2000tutor.com and a bunch of other websites as well. And we grew that over the course of 1999 and into 2000. And then in 2001, that business was acquired by a company called Penton Media. And it was a really neat run. It was a lot of fun. The ability to kind of start something from scratch. I was 22 years old at the time when I started the business, and so it was a fantastic opportunity to learn so much at an early age. But one of the things that I found with 2000tutor.com that I would definitely pass along to entrepreneurs, and it seems like common sense, but I think oftentimes people don't give it enough thought when they think about starting a venture, is the importance of the people that you start a company with. So the people that I started 2000tutor.com with are great folks, and a couple of them are still very close friends to this day. But one of the things that we found with that business was, as we kind of got into the process of starting the company, our goals were very much misaligned. So we had some people who wanted to work on the business just in the a few hours of their spare time on the weekends, and other people in the company who actually wanted to work on it as a full-time activity. And especially given some of the success that we saw and some of the traction we were seeing on the website, it was one of those things where we just didn't have quite the right team in place. And going back and thinking about that experience now, 10 years later, one of the things I realized is a couple of the people who I got into business with on that venture, I really didn't even know. They were people that were recommended by a friend of mine, and in fact, in one case, one of the guys I literally had never met before we formed our partnership. So it was one of those things where, at 22, I didn't think much of it. It was exciting to start a business, but there was so much that was hard about not having the right fit, about not having the right people. And so that was one of the things that I tend to relay on to people is when you're going to start a company, if you're going to do it with other people, think long and hard about who you're going to start that business with and the dynamics of the team. Because I think that time spent up front doing that definitely is time well spent, because if you do have personnel problems or fit issues later on, that's going to be something that's going to take a lot of your time, a lot of your attention, and most importantly, a lot of your energy. So that was my big lesson learned from my first venture. In the bottom of the screen there, you can see a picture of the current crew that's working on EduFire, at least some of the current crew that's working on EduFire right now. We've got a great team involved. So a couple of, and you can also ask me questions privately or publicly. To do a private question, you just take the drop-down box in the chat menu and just select my name, and that'll just go to me if you want to do that. Otherwise, you can do that. And Lauren, we do have more than just men working on EduFire. It just so happened that picture was just of men. One of the questions was, what was the reason for selling the company? And that's a really great question. And I think that the best answer that I can give to that is that I felt that the company that I was selling the business to was going to do bigger things with it than I could have done on my own. With the business at the time, I was relatively young. I didn't know kind of how to access capital or really build a big team. And so we actually felt that selling the company was the right thing, because the parent company had a lot of resources and could really grow the company and leverage the properties that they had, the other websites that they had to really drive traffic to it and everything. So I think it's a very valid reason for selling a company when you find out that your the company has outgrown you, so to speak. And at the time I was young, and it was a great opportunity to step back, and I'd been working pretty hard for a few years, and step back and enjoy life for a little bit. So venture number 2 is, and I'll actually kind of lump a bunch of different things together, because I kind of consider these to be more of my ventures that weren't successful. One was a company called Pro, which stood for Professional Remote Offices, and our idea back in 2001 was to create kind of remote office facilities for workers, so people who lived in the suburbs wouldn't have to commute into the inner city, and they could work and they could have access to broadband internet, which wasn't very widespread at the time. They could have access to fax and a lot of these other technologies in their own neighborhood, and then people from the neighborhoods could all group up together and work. And we spent some time working on that business idea, and it was one of those things where we really were excited about it for a while. And this was kind of started in the throes of the .com, where everybody was raising money and going public, and we thought, wow, this is a really big opportunity. And it never really took off, and we actually never got to market. And I had a couple of other businesses like that too. I had one called SimpleTrips.com, which was trying to help people find discounted travel through Priceline. Another one called Tickets for Less, which was how to get the cheapest price for best tickets for sporting events and concerts. And what I've learned from those ventures and having those kind of earlier in my career is it's really important as an entrepreneur to pursue your passion. You hear this a lot, but it was really impressed upon me actually just recently. I just finished the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And if you haven't read that book, it's a fantastic read as an entrepreneur, because he really talks a lot about what it took for people who were entrepreneurs or who were very successful to get that way. And one of the things that he talks about in the book is this notion of the 10,000 hour rule. So he talks about guys like Bill Gates and Bill Joy, who were computer programmers, or Steve Jobs. He talks about the Beatles and when they used to play 8-hour sets in Hamburg. And one of the things that he talks about is that most of the people who are truly successful in life, when you look at how long they've been doing what they've been doing, it's typically around 10,000 hours before they became successful. And when you think about that, you think about starting a company, it could be, and many times it is, 10,000 hours of what you're doing to really achieve success. So when I started Pro and Simple Trips and Tickets for Less, I don't know that I was extremely passionate about providing office space for people, or Priceline travel, or tickets. They were all cool things, and they sounded like fun businesses, but they weren't the type of thing that I was really I wanted to spend my devote my life or significant years to. And I think that was something that was definitely a differentiating factor. So, you'll hear people say, pursue your passion, do what you love, start a company around what you love. Many people oftentimes don't do that. What they do is they oftentimes, find a good idea, or they find something that they think they can make money on, and then they somehow, find the motivation to do that. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I think that the most successful entrepreneurs, I think the people who have achieved the big dreams and things like the Microsofts and the eBays and whatnot, are people who really had a very strong passion for what it was that they were doing. So I really think it comes from an internal versus an external philosophy. I mean, I was in business school at UCLA, and a lot of times